Before we continue, like and subscribe to the channel, but only if you enjoy this type of content and want to see more in the future, and write in the comments where you are listening from. I love reading all the comments. Let's begin. To understand Sufism, or Tasawwuf as it is known in Arabic, one must first understand that it is not a separate sect of Islam. It is, rather, its inner dimension. Its spiritual core. The Sufis themselves often use the metaphor of a fruit to explain their path. The outer skin of the fruit is the Sharia, the divine law of Islam that governs the external life of the community. The flesh of the fruit is the Tariqa, the mystical path of Sufism that guides the inner life of the seeker, and the seed at the very heart of the fruit is the Haqiqah, the ultimate divine truth, or reality, that is the goal of the entire journey. The Sufi path is a journey from the outside in, from the outer observance of the law, to the inner, direct and personal experience of the lawgiver. Its goal is not simply to obey God, but to know God, to taste the divine reality, to polish the mirror of the human heart until it becomes a perfect reflection of the divine beauty. It is a path of transformation, a spiritual alchemy designed to turn the base metal of the ordinary self into the pure gold of a soul that is united with its source. The origins of this mystical path are traced by the Sufis themselves back to the Prophet Muhammad and to the inner circle of his companions. They see its foundation in the very heart of the Quranic revelation and in the Prophet's own deep contemplative nature. The central guiding principle comes from a famous and a beautiful tradition, or hadith, in which the angel Gabriel comes to the Prophet and asks him not just about Islam or faith, but about a third, higher state, ihsan, or spiritual excellence. The Prophet replies, "Ihsan is to worship God as if you see him, for if you do not see him, he nonetheless sees you." This is the very essence of the Sufi project, the cultivation of a constant, a loving and a deeply intimate awareness of the divine presence in every single moment of one's life. It is the transformation of a faith based on belief in God into a life lived in the constant, loving and overwhelming presence of God. In the first centuries after the Prophet's life, as the Islamic Empire expanded and became a great worldly power, a reaction began to set in. Many devout souls looked at the growing wealth, the luxury and the political power of the caliphate, and they feared that the inner, spiritual core of the message was being lost. They began to retreat from the world, renouncing worldly pleasures in favor of a life of poverty, of fasting, and of intense, constant prayer. These were the first ascetics, the early pioneers of the Sufi path. They were known as the weepers, for they were often overcome with tears of both awe in the face of God's majesty and sorrow for their own perceived sinfulness. Their path was, at first, a path of awe, of reverence, and of a deep and a healthy fear of the divine judgment. It was a movement to preserve the inner purity of the original Islamic message in a world that seemed to be increasingly concerned with outer power and glory. It was a return to the heart. But in the 8th and the 9th centuries, a profound and a beautiful shift began to occur. The primary motivation of the path began to move from a mysticism based on fear to a mysticism based on a passionate and all-consuming and an ecstatic love. The great pioneering figure of this new movement was a woman, the brilliant and a deeply influential saint from Basra, Rabia al-Adawiyya. She taught that the highest spiritual state was not to worship God out of a desire for heavenly reward or a fear of hellish punishment, but to worship him for his own sake alone. Her famous prayer became the anthem for this new and a more intimate form of mysticism. "O God," she cried, "if I worship you for fear of hell, then burn me in hell, and if I worship you in hope of paradise, then exclude me from paradise, but if I worship you for your own sake alone, then grudge me not your everlasting beauty." This is the birth of the doctrine of disinterested, selfless and ecstatic divine love, a love that does not ask for anything in return, but that finds its entire and its perfect reward in the very act of loving the beloved. From a utilitarian perspective, the Sufi path can be seen as a profound and a highly sophisticated spiritual technology, a science of the soul that is aimed at achieving the highest possible state of human well-being and flourishing. Its goal is the complete and a total elimination of the psychological suffering that is caused by the ego, the nafs, and to replace it with the perfect, unshakable, and blissful happiness that comes from the direct experience of the divine reality. It is a practical system for maximizing the utility of the soul, for achieving a state of permanent and an ultimate joy. Over the centuries, this deeply personal, mystical impulse began to be formalized. The teachings of the great masters were passed down to their disciples, and the great Sufi orders, or brotherhoods, the Tariqas, began to form. These were the schools of the soul, great institutional channels through which the secret inner knowledge of the path could be preserved and transmitted. Orders like the Qadiriyya, the Naqshbandiyya, the Chishtiya, and the Mevlevi order of Rumi's famous whirling dervishes, all of which continue to this day. At the center of these orders was the figure of the Shaikh, the spiritual master, the guide who had already walked the path and who could lead the seeker, the salik, through its difficult and often dangerous terrain. The relationship between the master and the disciple became the very heart of the Sufi journey, a living transmission of a knowledge that could not be learned from books alone, but had to be caught, like a flame, from the burning heart of another. And so, we see that Sufism is not a set of beliefs or a collection of dogmas. It is a path, a practical and an experiential journey of transformation. It is the journey from the outer shell of religious observance to the inner, living and beating heart of spiritual experience. It is a quest to polish the mirror of the human heart, to wipe away the dust of the world and the rust of the ego, until that small human mirror can become a perfect reflection of the infinite and an everlasting light of the divine. But before the seeker can even begin to take the first step on this great and a beautiful path, he must first confront, and then conquer, the great and a powerful enemy that stands in his way, an enemy that is not in the world outside, but that lives and breathes in the very center of his own being. This is the great and the necessary first battle of the Sufi path, the battle against the deceptive, the tyrannical, and the ever-present lower self, the nafs. The great journey of Sufism begins not with a step outward, but with a courageous and a terrifying step inward. The seeker, the salik, having heard the call of the beloved, understands that the path to the divine palace is not an external one. It is a path that leads directly through the dark, tangled, and often dangerous forest of his own soul. And at the very entrance to this forest, he must confront the great guardian, the first and most formidable of all his enemies, an enemy that is more intimate to him than his own jugular vein. This enemy is the nafs, a rich and a complex Arabic word that is often translated as the ego, or the lower self, but it is much more than that. The nafs is the very principle of our individual consciousness, the seat of our desires, our appetites, our passions, our anger, our pride, and our fears. It is the powerful, instinctual, and deeply selfish voice within each of us that constantly whispers the one seductive and ruinous word, I. It is the great illusion that convinces us that we are separate, independent, and solitary beings in a world of other separate beings. The Sufi tradition describes the nafs as a reality that exists in several different levels or states of development, and the starting point for every human being, the default state of the unawakened soul, is its lowest and most dangerous form. This is the nafs al-amara, a phrase from the Quran that means the self that commands to evil, or the tyrannical self. This is not just a self that is prone to error, it is a self that actively commands us towards actions that are harmful to ourselves and to others. It is an inner tyrant. The great Sufi masters have often compared this tyrannical self to a wild and an untamed animal. It is like a ferocious, untrained dog, or a powerful wild horse that has never known a rider. Its energy is not in itself evil, it is simply the raw, untamed energy of life. But it is a force without direction, without wisdom, and without discipline. It is driven by pure, blind, and insatiable impulse. It seeks only the immediate gratification of its own desires, without any thought for the consequences. It is the beast within. The characteristics of this tyrannical self are the very source of all the vices that plague the human heart. It is the source of greed, the constant, gnawing hunger for more wealth, more possessions, more status. It is the source of lust, the insatiable desire for physical pleasure. It is the source of envy, the bitter poison that cannot stand to see the good fortune of others, and it is the source of anger, the violent, explosive rage that erupts whenever its will is thwarted. It is, above all, the source of arrogance, the profound and a deeply deluded belief in its own supreme importance. From a utilitarian perspective, the nafs al-amara is the single greatest source of disutility in the world. It is the engine of all human suffering. It is the selfish, grasping impulse within each individual that leads directly to social conflict, to cruelty, to injustice, and to war. A society made up of individuals who are all dominated by their own tyrannical selves is a society in a state of perpetual and a miserable conflict. The Sufi project of taming the nafs, therefore, is not just a path to personal salvation, it is a profound and a practical technology for creating a more compassionate, a more harmonious, and a happier world. The great battle of the Sufi path, then, is this first great battle, the taming of this inner beast. It is crucial to understand that the goal is not to destroy the nafs, for its energy is the very energy of life itself. The goal is to tame it, to discipline it, and to transform it, to take the wild, destructive power of the untamed horse and to harness it, to turn it from a chaotic force of destruction into a powerful and a noble steed that can carry the seeker on their journey towards the divine. This is the great and a difficult work of spiritual alchemy. This is a battle that cannot be won alone. The seeker needs a guide, a sheikh, a spiritual master who has already successfully tamed his own inner beast. The sheikh is the master horse trainer, the one who knows the secret nature of the tyrannical self, who knows its tricks, its deceptions, and its immense power, and who has the wisdom to prescribe the right exercises, the right disciplines that are needed to bring it under control. The seeker must place himself in the hands of the master with a profound and a humble trust. The disciplines prescribed by the master are the traditional tools of the Sufi path, tools designed to slowly and systematically weaken the grip of the tyrannical self. The practice of fasting is used to discipline the body's gross appetites for food and drink. The practice of vigilance, of constantly watching one's own thoughts and impulses, is used to bring the unconscious habits of the nafs into the light of awareness, and the practice of solitude, of retreating from the distractions of the world, forces the seeker to confront his own inner beast, with no place left to hide. Perhaps the most powerful of all these tools is the practice of selfless service, or khidma. The seeker is often commanded to perform the lowest and most menial of tasks. To serve his fellow seekers, to feed the poor, to clean the floors of the Sufi lodge. These acts of humble service are a direct assault on the most powerful fortress of the tyrannical self, its pride, its arrogance, and its sense of its own supreme importance. By serving others, the seeker slowly but surely begins to break the spell of his own selfishness. The ultimate goal of this great inner battle is to begin to see through the central illusion that the tyrannical self creates, the illusion that I am a separate, solid, and an independent being. The nafs is the great liar that tells us that our own needs, our own desires, and our own survival are the most important things in the universe. The entire Sufi path is a gradual process of unmasking this lie, of realizing that our true identity is not this small, grasping and terrified I, but is something far vaster, far more beautiful, and far more mysteriously connected to the whole of existence. The first great victory on the path of the Sufi, then, is not some grand ecstatic vision of God. It is not a moment of blissful union, it is a much more humble, a more difficult and a more courageous victory. It is the moment when the seeker, for the first time, successfully says no to his own inner tyrant. It is the moment he recognizes that there is a war to be fought within his own soul, and that he, with the help of a higher power, has the strength to begin to fight it. Having now recognized the enemy within, having declared war on his own tyrannical self, the seeker is now ready to begin the long and an arduous journey of transformation. He is ready to move beyond this first, most primitive, and most dangerous stage of the soul, and to begin the slow, difficult, and beautiful ascent through the higher and the more refined stations of the nafs, a journey that will ultimately lead him from the state of a commanding tyrant to the state of a soul that is finally and blissfully at peace. The great and often lifelong battle of the Sufi path has now been declared. The seeker has recognized the tyrannical self, the nafs al-amara, the inner beast that commands to evil, and he has, with the help of his guide, begun the difficult and an arduous work of taming it. But the Sufi journey is not just a war, it is a process of education, of transformation. The goal is not to cage the beast, but to transform it into a noble and a willing companion. This is the great ascending journey of the nafs, a ladder of the soul that moves, step by painful step, from a state of blind servitude to a state of enlightened peace. The first great victory in this inner war, the first sign that the seeker is making progress, is the awakening of the conscience. The soul transitions from the tyrannical self to the second stage, the nafs al-lawwama, or the blaming self. At this stage, the seeker is no longer a blind slave to his own impulses. He has developed an inner critic, a faculty that is able to recognize his own faults, his own sins, and his own shortcomings. He has begun to see the ugliness of his own ego. This is a crucial and a necessary step forward, but it is a deeply painful one. The blaming self is in a state of constant and an almost unbearable inner conflict. On the one hand, it is still pulled by the old habits of the tyrannical self, by greed, by envy, by anger, and by pride. But on the other hand, its newly awakened conscience now stands in judgment. After every slip, after every transgression, the blaming self is consumed by a wave of guilt, of regret, and of bitter self-recrimination. The soul at this stage is a battlefield, a civil war between the part that still wants to sin and the part that now despises the sin. It is a life of constant oscillation, of falling into error and then rising up in repentance, only to fall again. It is a state of profound unhappiness and a deep spiritual dissatisfaction. The seeker is no longer at ease in his own sin, but he has not yet found peace in his own virtue. He is a man caught between two worlds, a resident of the painful purgatorial realm of his own conscience. From a utilitarian perspective, this is a significant if painful step toward a better state of being, while the individual is in a state of constant internal suffering. The guilt and the shame they feel act as a powerful brake on their most harmful, antisocial behaviors. The pain of the conscience is the very mechanism that begins to transform a selfish, destructive individual into a more responsible and a more cooperative member of society. It is a necessary, if difficult, stage in the journey toward a greater collective well-being. Through continued spiritual practice, through prayer, through fasting, and through the guidance of his master, the seeker, if he perseveres, can begin to move beyond this painful, warring state. The soul can then ascend to the third stage, the nafs al-mulhama, or the inspired self. At this level, the primary motivation of the soul begins to shift. The constant negative voice of self-blame is gradually replaced by a new, more positive, and more beautiful inner voice, the voice of divine inspiration. The inspired self is a soul that is beginning to fall in love with the good. It starts to find a genuine and a profound pleasure in the acts of devotion and of virtue that were once a difficult struggle. Prayer is no longer a chore, but a source of deep comfort and intimacy. Charity is no longer a reluctant duty, but a joyful expression of a growing compassion. The war with the lower self is not yet completely over, but the tide has turned. The soul is now primarily motivated not by a fear of its own darkness, but by a yearning for the divine light. This is a state of increasing tranquility, of creativity, and of a deepening trust in the divine. The seeker begins to experience the world not as a place of temptation and of trial, but as a theater of divine signs, a beautiful and an intricate tapestry of meaning that is constantly revealing the presence of the beloved. His heart is becoming more sensitive, more open, and more receptive to the subtle whispers of the sacred. He is moving from a religion of rules to a religion of love. As the seeker continues to grow, he can ascend to the even higher stations of the soul. He can reach the nafs al-mutmina, the self at peace. This is a state of profound and an unshakable serenity, where the inner war has finally come to an end. The beast has been completely tamed, and it now rests in a state of perfect peaceful submission to the will of its master. Doubt is replaced by certainty, anxiety by tranquility, and the soul enters a state of deep, abiding, and luminous peace. Beyond this lies the nafs al-Rabia, the contented self, a soul that is not just at peace with God's will, but is actively and joyfully pleased with it. It accepts everything that comes to it, whether it appears to be a blessing or a trial, as a direct and a perfect gift from the hand of the beloved. And beyond this still is the nafs al-Mardiya, the pleasing self, a state where not only is the self content with God, but God is pleased with the self, a state of perfect, blissful, and reciprocal love. The final and the highest station of this journey is the nafs as-Safiyya, the purified or completed self. At this stage, the illusion of a separate individual self, the great lie of the nafs, has been completely and totally dissolved. The individual will has become a perfect and a flawless mirror for the divine will. The rider and the horse are now one. the person has become a perfect instrument, a pure channel through which the divine attributes of love, of compassion, of mercy can flow into the world without any obstruction from the ego. This is the state of maximum and of perfect utility. All internal conflict, all suffering has ceased, and the individual's actions are now in perfect harmony with the well-being of all of creation. For they are motivated by nothing less than a universal and a divine love. It is the achievement of a perfect personal happiness that is also the source of a perfect and a universal benevolence. The journey of the nafs, then, is a grand and a hopeful map of the soul's immense potential for growth. It shows that the Sufi path is not a single magical leap, but a long, a gradual, and a deeply practical process of refinement, of discipline, and of transformation. It is the science of turning the tyrannical, destructive energy of the ego into the peaceful, creative, and luminous energy of a soul that has finally found its way home. It is the journey from the prison of the self to the infinite freedom of the divine. The great and a difficult war against the tyrannical lower self, the nafs, has now been declared. The seeker has recognized the enemy within and has taken up the spiritual arms of discipline and devotion. But to win this war, he must do more than just fight against his own darkness. He must cultivate a new and a more powerful source of light within himself. And for the Sufi, the source of this light, the true center of our being, is not the rational mind, but the qalb, the spiritual heart. In the Sufi tradition, the heart is not merely the seat of our emotions, it is a true and a profound organ of perception, a kind of spiritual sixth sense. It is the faculty within us that is capable of a direct, intuitive, and an unmediated knowledge of divine realities, a form of knowing that the Sufis call dawak, or tasting. It is a knowledge that is more certain and more intimate than any logical proof or any philosophical argument. The entire Sufi path, in a sense, is a journey to awaken this dormant, sleeping organ of the soul. The great masters of the path have, for centuries, used a single, powerful, and a beautiful metaphor to describe the nature of this spiritual heart. The heart, they say, in its original and primordial state. The state in which it was created is like a perfect and an immaculately polished mirror in its pristine condition. This mirror is capable of perfectly reflecting the infinite light, the boundless beauty, and the endless attributes of the divine. It is the place where the human and the divine can meet. But for almost all of us, this mirror is not clean. Over the course of our lives, the actions and the attachments of our lower self, our nafs, have covered its surface with a thick and an almost opaque layer of rust and grime. This rust is a metaphor for all the things that obscure our inner vision and that prevent us from seeing the divine reality. It is the rust of our sins, of our selfish desires, of our anger, of our pride, and of our envy. It is the grime of our attachment to the fleeting pleasures and the distracting anxieties of the material world. This spiritual rust is also formed by the endless, distracting chatter of our own minds. The constant, internal monologue of the ego that is always judging, always desiring, always fearing, and always pulling our attention away from the present moment. This is the great veil that separates us from God. And the central practical task of the Sufi seeker is a simple one. He must find a way to clean this mirror, to tirelessly, patiently, and lovingly polish the surface of his own heart, until the rust of the ego is gone and the light of the divine can once again shine through. The great and a powerful tool for this sacred act of polishing is the central spiritual practice of Sufism, the practice of Dhikr, an Arabic word that means remembrance. This practice is rooted deeply in the Quran, which repeatedly commands the believers to remember God often and to find rest for their hearts in the remembrance of God. Dhikr is the conscious and a continuous effort to bring the presence of God into the mind, to replace the distracting chatter of the ego with the sacred and the unifying reality of the divine. The practice can take many forms. It can be the silent, inward repetition of one of the names of God in the heart, or it can be the loud, vocal, and often a communal chanting of a sacred phrase, like the great testimony of faith, La ilaha illallah, which means, there is no God but God. This phrase is not just a statement of monotheism for the Sufi, it is a spiritual weapon, a powerful tool of negation and affirmation. In saying, no God, the seeker negates all the false gods, the idols of the ego, wealth, power, and status, and in saying, but God, he affirms the one and the only true reality. From a utilitarian perspective, this practice is a profound form of spiritual and a psychological therapy. The rust of the heart, the endless, anxious chatter of the ego, the negative emotions of anger, of envy, and of greed, are the direct and the primary sources of all our human suffering and our unhappiness. Dhikr is a practical and a highly effective technology for eliminating these negative mental states and for replacing them with a state of profound peace, of focus, and of tranquility. It is a path that is designed to maximize the inner well-being and the spiritual flourishing of the individual. The act of remembrance is like a spiritual solvent that slowly and patiently dissolves the hardened rust of the ego by constantly filling the mind with the name of God. The seeker leaves no room for the distracting whispers of the nafs. It is a process of profound and a total reorientation, a shifting of the very center of one's being, away from the small, the selfish, and the separate I, and towards the vast, the universal and the all-encompassing reality of the One. It is a way of remembering who we truly are, beneath all the layers of our conditioned personality. The Sufis speak of different kinds of dhikr. There is the dhikr of the tongue, the simple, vocal repetition of the sacred names, which is the first and the most accessible stage, but as the practice deepens, it moves from the tongue to the heart, becoming a dhikr of the heart, a silent and a constant inner remembrance that eventually becomes as natural and as effortless as breathing. The heart itself begins to chant the name of God, even when the conscious mind is occupied with other things. Ultimately, the goal is to reach a state where the dhikr is no longer something you do, but is something you are. A state where the remembrancer, the act of remembrance, and the one who is remembered all become one. It is a state of total immersion, complete absorption in the divine presence, a state where the mirror of the heart has been so thoroughly polished that it has become completely transparent, a pure, clean window through which the divine light can shine without any obstruction. This, then, is the great and essential science of the soul that lies at the heart of the Sufi path. The human being is a creature who has forgotten his divine origin, and his heart, which was created to be a perfect mirror of that origin, has become rusted and dark. The path of the Sufi is the path of polishing that mirror, and the tool of the polisher is the constant loving and a deeply transformative practice of the remembrance of God, a practice that is designed to heal the heart and to restore its original luminous purity. The ultimate goal of this long and a patient labor is the opening of the eye of the heart, the moment when the last stubborn flecks of rust are finally wiped away and the heart can for the first time truly see. It is the moment when the seeker no longer just believes in God, but directly perceives the divine reality that is both at the very center of his own being and in every single atom of the vast and the beautiful universe around him. In the 11th century, the Islamic world was in a state of profound intellectual and a spiritual crisis. Three great and often conflicting currents of thought were vying for the hearts and the minds of the people. There were the ulama, the orthodox scholars of the divine law, the Sharia, who emphasized the importance of tradition and the literal text, and who were often deeply suspicious of what they saw as the emotional excesses of the mystics. Then there were the philosophers, the falasifa, who had fallen deeply in love with the pure rational logic of the ancient Greeks, of Plato and of Aristotle, and who believed that reason alone was the surest path to the truth, a position that often placed them in direct conflict with the traditional teachings of the faith. And finally, there were the Sufis, the mystics, who argued that the only real truth was the direct, personal, and an often ecstatic experience of God, an experience that they claimed was higher than both the law of the scholars and the logic of the philosophers. These three great rivers of thought were in danger of flowing in completely different directions, threatening to fracture the unity of the Islamic worldview, and it was into this great and a deeply consequential debate that a single towering intellect would emerge. A man whose life and whose work would forever change the relationship between law, reason, and mysticism in Islam. His name was Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, and he would come to be known by the honorific title Hujjat al-Islam, the proof of Islam. Al-Ghazali was, by any measure, the most brilliant and the most celebrated academic of his age. He was a master of both Islamic law and of Greek philosophy, and by the age of 33 he had been appointed to the most prestigious teaching position in the entire Islamic world. At the Nizamiya University in Baghdad, he was at the very pinnacle of his profession. He had fame, he had wealth, He had the respect of caliphs and of kings, and he had a mind that seemed capable of conquering any intellectual problem. But inwardly, he was in a state of profound and a deeply agonizing turmoil, as he recounts in his magnificent autobiography, The Deliverance from Error. He came to realize that his vast, encyclopedic knowledge was nothing more than a collection of second-hand opinions, of clever arguments, and of sophisticated debates. It gave him prestige, but it did not give him what his soul truly craved: certainty, a direct, an unshakable, and a personal knowledge of the truth. He had mastered the maps, but he had never actually visited the country they described. This intellectual crisis soon became a full-blown spiritual and a psychological breakdown. He began by systematically studying, and then refuting, the claims of the rationalist philosophers. He concluded that pure reason, on its own, was a brilliant tool, but that it was ultimately incapable of grasping the ultimate truths of God and of the soul. It could, in fact, lead to conclusions that were contrary to faith. This realization plunged him into a state of profound and a debilitating skepticism, a deep nihilistic void where all truth seemed to be impossible. The crisis was so profound that it manifested physically. He tells us that his tongue became tied. He was unable to speak, to lecture to his hundreds of students. He lost his appetite. He fell into a deep and a consuming melancholy. The greatest intellectual in the Islamic world was on the brink of a complete and a total collapse. He had reached the dead end of the mind, and he knew that if he was to find a way out, he would have to abandon the path of the intellect, and to embark on a new and a more dangerous path. He realized that the only path left for him was the path of the Sufis, the path of direct personal and experiential knowledge, the path of tasting the divine reality, and so, in a decision that shocked the entire intellectual world, he abandoned everything. He gave up his prestigious career, he gave away his wealth, he left his family, and for the next 11 years, he became a wandering dervish, a poor Sufi, seeking not knowledge in books, but the knowledge that comes from the purification of the heart and the direct experience of God. When he finally returned to teaching, it was as a completely changed man. His great life's work would be to create a grand and a majestic synthesis, to take the three warring rivers of Islamic thought, the law of the scholars, the reason of the philosophers, and the experience of the Sufis, and to show how they all flowed from, and returned to, the same great divine ocean. This project, from a utilitarian perspective, had an almost incalculable social benefit. It healed a deep and a dangerous rift in his civilization, creating a more holistic, a more stable, and a more psychologically satisfying religious framework for millions of people. His great masterpiece, the monumental Ihya Ulum al-Din, or the revival of the religious sciences, is the ultimate expression of this synthesis. It is a comprehensive guide to a complete human life, a book that gives equal and respectful weight to both the outer and the inner dimensions of the faith. It shows how the external rituals of Islam, the daily prayers, the fasting, the pilgrimage, are the necessary body of the religion, but that they are dead without the inner, spiritual states that the Sufis cultivated, states of love, of patience, of gratitude, and of a constant loving remembrance of God. Al-Ghazali, in essence, brought the heart and the head back together. He used the powerful tools of logic and of reason to defend the truths of revelation, and he showed that the mystical experience of the Sufis was not an emotional, heretical deviation from the faith, but was, in fact, the highest and the most perfect fulfillment of it. He made Sufism safe for the orthodox. He gave it a firm, theological foundation, and he protected it from the accusations of heresy that had so often been leveled against it. He is in many ways the great healer of the Islamic intellectual tradition, a figure whose stature and whose influence can be compared to that of a Saint Augustine or a Thomas Aquinas in the Christian West. He did not just argue for a single position, he created a new, a more capacious, and a more unified vision of his entire faith. A great house with many rooms where the legal scholar, the rational theologian, and the mystical lover of God could all dwell together in a state of mutual respect and a shared purpose. His own personal and an agonizing journey, from the heights of intellectual pride, through the dark valley of skeptical despair, and into the luminous garden of mystical experience, became a model for generations of seekers who would follow, he showed, with the full authority of his own life. That the path of the mind and the path of the heart are not two different paths, but are two wings that, when working in perfect harmony, can allow the human soul to soar to the very highest of all possible heavens. In our last part, we saw how the great scholar Al-Ghazali built a majestic, intellectual bridge between the outer law of Islam and the inner path of the Sufis. But the heart of that inner path, the very emotional and a spiritual fire that he sought to protect, had been kindled centuries earlier in the humble, ascetic, and profoundly influential life of a single, extraordinary woman. She is one of the first and the greatest of the Sufi saints, a woman who would forever change the very language of the soul's relationship with God. She was Rabia al-Adawiyya of Basra. Rabia's life is a testament to the power of a spirit to overcome the most crushing of worldly circumstances. Born into a poor family in the 8th century, she was orphaned at a young age and sold into slavery. Her days were filled with hard labor, but her nights were filled with prayer, with vigils, and with a deep and a secret communion with God. It is said that her master one night saw a mysterious divine light shining above her head as she prayed, and he was so overcome with awe and with fear that he freed her immediately, allowing her to embark on a life of extreme poverty, of asceticism, and of complete and a total devotion to God. She was a part of the early Sufi movement, which was, at that time, dominated by a spirit of awe, of reverence, and of a deep and a holy fear of the divine. The early mystics were weepers, men and women who were overwhelmed by the majesty of God and by a profound sense of their own sinfulness, but Rabia would introduce a new and a revolutionary note into this spiritual symphony. She would shift the very center of the mystical life away from the fear of the judge and towards a passionate and all-consuming and an ecstatic love for the beloved. Her great and an enduring contribution to Sufism is her doctrine of disinterested, selfless love. She looked at the religious devotion of the people around her, and she saw that it was, for the most part, a form of spiritual commerce, a transactional relationship with the divine. People prayed, they fasted, and they gave charity, not out of a pure love for God, but out of a self-interested desire to gain a reward. The eternal bliss of paradise, and to avoid a punishment, the eternal torments of hell, their piety, she argued, was still rooted in the selfish desires of the nafs. Rabia, in a series of brilliant and often shocking public gestures, declared war on this transactional faith. In the most famous story told about her, she was seen walking through the streets of her city, Basra, carrying a flaming torch in one hand and a bucket of water in the other. When the people asked her what she was doing, she gave them an answer that would change the course of Islamic mysticism forever. "I am going to set fire to paradise," she declared, "and to pour water on hell, so that these two veils may disappear forever and the pilgrims may see the real purpose of their quest." Her meaning was clear, and it was radical. The hope for paradise and the fear of hell are, in the end, just two great veils that hide the true face of the beloved. They encourage us to focus on our own future, on our own salvation, on our own selves, rather than on God Himself. She was calling for a new, a purer and a more selfless form of devotion. A love for God that was completely and totally disinterested. A love that asked for nothing, not even the ultimate reward of eternal bliss, in return. This entire philosophy is perfectly encapsulated in her most famous prayer, a prayer that has become the very anthem of the Sufi path of love. "O my Lord," she prayed, "if I worship you from fear of hell, then burn me in hell, and if I worship you in hope of paradise, then exclude me from paradise. But if I worship you for your own sake alone, then do not withhold from me your everlasting beauty." It is one of the most powerful and most beautiful statements of pure, unconditional love in all of world religion. From a utilitarian perspective, Rabia's doctrine is a profound psychological and a spiritual innovation. It is a path to a higher and a more stable form of human well-being. A religious life that is based on the fear of punishment and the desire for reward is a life of constant anxiety, of spiritual calculation, of a never-ending uncertainty about whether one has done enough to merit salvation. But Rabia's path of selfless love frees the soul from this entire economy of fear and of hope. It is a path that leads to a profound and unshakable and a deeply joyful inner peace, because its reward is not in the future. It is in the very act of loving, here and now. Her life was a perfect embodiment of this teaching. She lived in a state of almost complete poverty, but she refused all offers of help, Content with the little that God provided, she refused all proposals of marriage, explaining that the marriage contract could only be made with her owner, with God, and that she herself did not exist, having been annihilated in him. Her entire being, her every thought, her every breath, was so completely absorbed in her love for the divine that there was simply no room for anything else. She taught that there were two kinds of love. There is the love that is common, a love that is still, in a sense, selfish, a love of God for the blessings he gives us, a gratitude for his kindness, but then there is the higher love, the love that is worthy of him, a love that is born when God lifts the veil from the heart of the lover, so that they can see his eternal beauty, and in that moment the lover is so completely and so totally consumed by that beauty that they forget themselves and the entire world entirely. Rabia, through her life and through her teachings, transformed the very character of the Sufi path. She took the early asceticism with its focus on awe and repentance, and she infused it with the passionate, the intimate, and the ecstatic language of the lover. She is the great mother of the Sufi tradition, the one who taught all the generations of mystics who would come after her that the relationship with God is not that of a slave to a master, or a subject to a king, but is the relationship of a lover, an ashiq, to their one and their only true beloved. All the great Sufi poets of love who would follow her, the great Persian masters like Attar and Hafiz, and most of all the great Jalaluddin Rumi, are all, in a very real sense, her spiritual children. They are all singing a variation on the great central theme that she was the first to so powerfully and so purely articulate, the theme that the spiritual life, at its very highest and its most profound, is nothing more and nothing less than a great, a consuming, and an eternal love story. We have now met the great synthesizer, Al-Ghazali, who built a bridge between the law and the heart, and the great pioneer of love, Rabia al-Adawiyya, who set that heart on fire with a divine and an ecstatic passion. We now turn to the man who would take all the threads of Sufi thought and weave them into the most comprehensive, most challenging, and most breathtakingly profound metaphysical system ever conceived. He is known as the Shaykh al-Akbar, the greatest master. His name is Muhyiddin ibn Arabi. Born in 12th century Andalusia, in Islamic Spain, Ibn Arabi was a towering intellectual and a spiritual giant, a figure whose complexity and influence can be compared to that of a Plato or a Kant in the West. He was a prolific writer, a tireless traveler, and a supreme mystic whose entire life was dedicated to exploring and to articulating the deepest mysteries of reality. He is the great philosopher of the Sufi path, and his work represents the very peak of its intellectual and its spiritual expression. At the very heart of his vast and a difficult teaching lies a single, powerful, and a world-altering doctrine, a concept that has been the source of both profound inspiration and intense controversy for centuries. This is his doctrine of wahdat al-wujud, a phrase that can be translated as the oneness of being or the unity of existence. It is a simple phrase that contains within it a complete and a total vision of the nature of God, of the world, and of the human soul. The central claim of this doctrine is as simple as it is radical. There is only one being, one true and an absolute reality, in all of existence, and that one reality is God, or al-Haq, the truth. Everything else, the entire vast and a seemingly diverse universe, from the most distant galaxy to the smallest grain of sand, from the highest angel to the lowliest insect, is not a separate independent reality. It is a theophany, a manifestation, a self-disclosure, or a tajalli, of that one single, all-encompassing being. To understand this profound idea, the Sufi masters use a number of beautiful and illuminating analogies. Imagine that God, the one reality, is an infinite and a shoreless ocean. Every created thing, every star, every tree, every human being, is simply a wave that momentarily rises on the surface of that ocean. The wave has its own, temporary, individual form. It has its own shape and its own motion. But its inner reality, its very substance, its wetness, is nothing other than the reality of the ocean itself. The wave is not separate from the ocean. It is simply a form that the ocean takes for a moment. Or, imagine that God is a single, pure, and an undifferentiated source of white light. The entire created universe is what happens when that single, white light passes through a great cosmic prism and is refracted into an infinite and a beautiful spectrum of countless different colors. Each created thing, each person, is a unique color in that spectrum, but the reality of each color is nothing other than the one light, which is its source. The world of multiplicity and of difference that we see with our physical eyes is just the beautiful, vibrant, and a colorful manifestation of the one single, undivided light. This vision provides a powerful and a beautiful answer to the old theological problem of creation. The world, Ibn Arabi teaches, was not created by God, as a potter creates a pot, a separate object made from a different substance. Instead, the world is the very form that God's own creative act takes. He uses the beautiful Quranic image of the sigh of the merciful. God, in his infinite and an unknowable essence, was a hidden treasure, who longed to be known, and so, out of a profound and a divine love, he exhaled, and this divine breath of mercy, the nafs al-Rahman, is the very substance, the very fabric of all of creation. From a utilitarian perspective, this philosophy is a powerful technology for achieving the ultimate state of human well-being. The root cause of almost all our suffering, our anxiety, our fear, our greed, and our hatred, is the illusion of separation, the belief that I am a small, vulnerable ego, separate from God, separate from other people, and separate from the world. This feeling of separation is the source of all conflict and all unhappiness. It is the fundamental disutility of the human condition. Ibn Arabi's doctrine of the oneness of being is the ultimate and the most powerful antidote to this illusion. If all of existence is, in reality, a single, unified, and a divine whole, then the feeling of separation is a dream, a mistake, a form of ignorance. The entire Sufi path is a process of awakening from this dream, of realizing in the deepest part of one's being the profound and a liberating truth of this oneness. And this realization leads directly to a state of supreme and an unshakable happiness. It eliminates the fear of death, for what is death but the wave returning to its own ocean? It eliminates greed, for how can one part of the ocean be greedy against another? And most importantly, it gives birth to a profound and a universal compassion. If every other person and every other creature is, in its deepest reality, just another manifestation of the one, divine self, then to love another is simply to love God, and to harm another is simply to harm yourself. It is the ultimate foundation for a universal and a compassionate ethic. This doctrine, however, was and still is deeply controversial. Many Orthodox scholars accused Ibn Arabi of pantheism, the heretical belief that the world is God, but the Sheikh's position was always more subtle and more paradoxical. He did not say that the world is God, but he also did not say that the world is other than God. The wave is not the entire ocean, but its reality is nothing but the ocean. The color is not the entire light, but its reality is nothing but the light. It is a truth that defies the simple, either-or logic of the rational mind. To grasp this truth, Ibn Arabi says, one must learn to see with two eyes, with the eye of the head, the eye of the law, and of reason. We see the world of multiplicity, of difference, of separation. We see a creator and a creation, a master and a servant, a world of clear and unnecessary distinctions, and this is a true and a necessary way of seeing, but with the eye of the heart, the eye of the mystic, we see the world of unity. The world where all these apparent differences dissolve into the single, luminous, and all-encompassing reality of the one. The complete human being, the perfect man, is the one who can see with both eyes at once, who can live in the tension of this great paradox, who can see God in all things and all things in God, who can understand that he is at once a humble, created servant, and at the same time a unique and a necessary manifestation of the one divine being. This is the dizzying, a beautiful and a deeply challenging vision of reality that the greatest master has laid out before us. We have now stood with the greatest master, Ibn Arabi, and have been introduced to his profound and a dizzying vision of Wahdat al-Wujud, the oneness of being. The idea that the entire universe is nothing but the endless, beautiful self-disclosure of a single, all-encompassing divine reality. But this immediately raises a difficult question. If our rational mind sees a world of multiplicity, of difference, and of separation, what faculty is it that can perceive this deeper, underlying unity? How do we bridge the gap between the one and the many? Ibn Arabi's answer to this is one of his most brilliant, most original, and most important contributions to human thought. He argues that there is a third, intermediate realm of reality, a realm that is poised exactly between the world of pure abstract spirit and the world of dense concrete matter, and the organ of perception that is perfectly suited to this realm is the creative imagination, or in Arabic, the khayal. This is the great bridge, the isthmus, or barzakh, that connects all the levels of existence. It is absolutely crucial to understand that when Ibn Arabi speaks of the imagination, he is not talking about make-believe, about fantasy, or about something that is simply unreal. For him, the creative imagination is a real and a profoundly powerful cognitive faculty. It is an organ of perception, just as real and as valid as our physical eyes or our logical reason. It is the one faculty that is capable of perceiving spiritual realities in a sensory form, of seeing the unseen. It is, in a very real sense, the eye of the heart. This concept is the key that unlocks his entire vision of the universe. For Ibn Arabi argues that the entire created world, the world of phenomena that we experience, is in its very essence an act of the divine creative imagination. The universe, in a profound and a literal sense, is a great and a beautiful dream in the mind of God. God, in his infinite and an unknowable essence, contains within himself the fixed archetypes, the eternal, uncreated ideas of all possible things, and the created world is the great imagined projection of these divine ideas. This means that the world we live in is in a strange intermediate state. It is both real and not real at the same time. It is real because its ultimate source and its very substance is the one absolute reality, God, but it is not real in the same ultimate way that God is real. It is a reflection, an image, a shadow, a dream. It is, as the Quran says, a collection of signs, or ayat, that point back to their hidden and their only true source. The world is a great and a beautiful illusion, but it is an illusion that is manifesting the one reality. And because we, as human beings, are created in the image of God, our own human imagination is a small, microcosmic reflection of this great divine and world-creating imagination. It is through our own faculty of khayal that we are able to perceive the world not as a collection of hard, separate, and lifeless objects, but as a fluid, a dynamic, and a deeply symbolic tapestry of divine self-disclosures. It is the imagination that allows us to see with the eye of the heart, to perceive the infinite, unified ocean that lies beneath all the separate, temporary waves. This imaginative vision is what allows the seeker to read the book of the world, to see that every single created thing, from the smallest flower to the most distant star, is a unique and a perfect manifestation of one or more of the divine names and attributes. In the rich tradition of Islamic theology, God has 99 beautiful names. He is the merciful, He is the just, He is the mighty, He is the beautiful, He is the terrible, He is the first, and He is the last. Ibn Arabi teaches that every object, every event, and every creature in the universe is a unique combination, a unique mirror that reflects these divine names. A beautiful sunset is a manifestation of God's name. The beautiful, an act of forgiveness, is a manifestation of God's name. Merciful. Even a terrifying storm or a fearsome predator is a manifestation of God's names. The mighty and the terrible, the creative imagination is the faculty that allows us to see the world this way, to see every single thing not as a random accident, but as a sacred word in the endless, divine poem of existence. From a utilitarian perspective, this worldview is a powerful technology for achieving a state of profound and a lasting well-being. A purely literal, a materialistic, or a disenchanted view of the world often leads to a feeling of alienation and meaninglessness, a state of deep and a painful disutility. But Ibn Arabi's vision of the world as a divine dream, a beautiful and a meaningful theophany, infuses every single moment and every single object with a sacred and a luminous significance. It is a practical method for cultivating a constant state of awe, of gratitude, and of compassionate connection to all things. This way of seeing transforms the world from a dead, mechanical machine into a living, breathing, and an intelligent being. It heals the wound of separation that is the source of so much of our fear and our anxiety. For if the entire world is the imagination of the one, and if my own imagination is a part of that, then I am not a stranger in the universe, I am a necessary and a beloved part of its great cosmic dream. This realization is the source of a profound and an unshakable peace, the highest possible form of human flourishing. The ultimate goal of the Sufi path, in this vision, is to awaken within this divine dream. The ordinary person is a dreamer who does not know that he is dreaming. He is trapped in the illusion of his own separate egoic self, the nafs, and he believes that the fleeting images of the world are the only reality. But the Gnostic, the Sufi, who has attained true knowledge, is the one who has woken up inside the dream, who has realized that both he and the world are nothing but the imaginative play of the one true dreamer. He has realized that the dreamer and the dream are not two different things, that his own consciousness is a small but a perfect reflection of the one divine consciousness that is dreaming the entire universe into being, and with this realization comes the final blissful state, the ability to see the beautiful, beloved face of the one single divine dreamer, perfectly and endlessly reflected in every single luminous detail of his own beautiful and his own deeply and his own lovingly imagined world. We have now explored the deep and often a dizzying metaphysical vision of the Sufi saints, a worldview of a unified, divine reality, of a self that must be tamed, and of a spiritual heart that must be polished. But Sufism is not, at its core, a system of philosophy to be understood. It is a path, a Tariqa, that must be walked. It is a practical, a disciplined, and an experiential journey of transformation, a journey from the exile of the ego back to the homeland of the soul, a journey back to God. The seeker on this path is known as a salik, a wayfarer, a spiritual traveler, and the Sufis have, for over 1,000 years, meticulously mapped the terrain of this inner journey. They understand that the path is long, that it is arduous, and that it is full of hidden dangers and subtle deceptions. The greatest of these dangers is the seeker's own nafs, the lower self, which is a master of disguise, a clever and a persistent enemy that can easily lead the solitary traveler astray. For this reason, the Sufi tradition is almost unanimous in its insistence that this journey cannot and should not be undertaken alone. The first, and the most important, practical step for any aspiring wayfarer is to find a guide, a spiritual master, a sheikh who has already walked the path, who knows its terrain, who has navigated its dangers, and who has arrived safely at the destination. To attempt to travel the path without a guide, the masters teach, is a sign of immense arrogance, an act of the very ego that one is trying to overcome. For the one who has no sheikh, they say, has Satan for his guide. The sheikh is the physician of the heart. He is a master psychologist of the soul, with the spiritual insight to diagnose the specific sicknesses that are afflicting the heart of the disciple. He can see the hidden rust of pride, the secret corrosion of envy, the deep stain of greed, and he knows the exact and the precise spiritual medicine that is needed for the cure. He does not offer a one-size-fits-all prescription. He tailors his guidance to the unique, individual needs of each and every seeker. The relationship between the master and the disciple, the murid, is the very heart of the Sufi path, and it is a relationship that is based on a single and a profoundly challenging principle: absolute submission, or taslim. The disciple must place his own will completely and totally in the hands of his master. He must have a trust that is so absolute that he becomes, in a famous and a startling Sufi saying, like a corpse in the hands of the washer, allowing the master to turn him this way and that without any resistance from his own ego. This concept of absolute submission is, of course, a profound challenge to our modern, individualistic values. But from a utilitarian perspective, it is a highly efficient and a deeply practical system for achieving spiritual well-being. The seeker, by surrendering their own flawed, ignorant, ego-driven will, gains access to the accumulated wisdom of a 1,000-year-old tradition, and to the personal lived experience of a master who has already achieved the goal. It is a trade-off that dramatically increases the chances of overcoming the immense suffering of the ego and of achieving the supreme happiness of divine union. The purpose of this submission is not to create a mindless automaton, but to break the tyrannical power of the nafs. It is the only force strong enough to shatter the prison of the ego. The masters say that the first stage of the journey is the annihilation of the disciple in the master, or fanaf and Shaikh. The disciple's own ego must dissolve into the spiritual presence of his guide, so that he can then be prepared for the ultimate goal, the annihilation of the self in God. The master is the door, the necessary gateway through which the seeker must pass. The Tariqa is not just a path, it is also an order, a brotherhood or a sisterhood, a spiritual family of fellow wayfarers. This community provides a safe, a supportive, and a loving container for the difficult, and the often a painful, work of spiritual transformation. It is a place where the seeker is surrounded by others who share his goal, who understand his struggles, and who can offer him both encouragement in his moments of doubt and a compassionate critique of his ego's deceptions. It is a profound antidote to the spiritual isolation of the modern world. Each of these great Sufi orders has its own unique flavor, its own specific methods, and its own unique spiritual chain, or silsila. This is a documented and an unbroken lineage of transmission, a chain of masters passing their secret knowledge from heart to heart, that stretches all the way back from the living Shaikh of the order, through all the great saints of the past, and connects finally to the Prophet Muhammad himself. This sacred lineage is what gives the teachings their authority, their power, and their divine blessing, or barak. One of the most important practices within the Tariqa is the practice of sohbah, a word that means companionship or spiritual discourse. This is the time that the disciples spend in the physical presence of their sheikh, listening to his teachings, asking him questions, and most importantly, simply being with him. The Sufis believe that the highest forms of knowledge are not transmitted through words alone, but are passed directly from heart to heart, through a kind of spiritual resonance. They call this a hal, a state of being, which is not learned but is tasted or caught like a fragrance in the air. The path, then, is not a solitary or a purely intellectual one. It is a lived, a communal, and a deeply human journey. It is a process of apprenticeship, of learning a sacred craft, the craft of polishing the heart, under the watchful, the loving, and the often a very demanding eye of a master craftsman. It is a journey that requires discipline, it requires trust, and it requires the support of a community of fellow travelers who are all walking in the same direction. Having now understood the great inner battlefield of the nafs, and having now found a guide and a community to help him navigate it, the seeker is finally ready to begin the real and the practical work of the journey. He is ready to begin the slow and the step-by-step process of walking the path, of moving through the various stations of effort and the various states of grace that will, God willing, lead him, in the end, out of the darkness of his own self and into the infinite and the luminous presence of his one true and only beloved. The seeker, the salik, has now formally entered upon the Sufi path, the Tariqa. He has recognized the enemy within, the tyrannical nafs. He has found a guide, the Shaikh, to lead him through the treacherous terrain of his own soul, and he has joined a community of fellow travelers to support him on his journey. Now the real and the often a deeply difficult work begins, the work of walking the path, of moving, step by step, through the various stages and stations that lead from the darkness of the ego to the luminous presence of the divine. The Sufi masters have, over the centuries, created a detailed and a deeply psychological map of this inner journey, and they make a crucial distinction between two different kinds of spiritual landmarks. On the one hand, there are the makamata, or the stations, and on the other, there are the awal, or the states. The stations are the stable and the enduring spiritual virtues that the seeker earns, or acquires, through his own sustained effort, through his own discipline, and through his own striving. They are the fruits of human labor. The states, on the other hand, which we will explore later, are the fleeting and the often ecstatic, spiritual feelings that are bestowed upon the seeker as a pure gift from God. They are flashes of divine grace that come and go beyond the seeker's control. The path, then, is a beautiful and a dynamic interplay between our own human effort to climb the great ladder of the stations and the divine grace that sometimes, for a brief and a beautiful moment, allows us to fly. This part of our journey is about the climbing, the difficult and the necessary work of the stations. The first, the last, and the most important of all the stations, the very foundation upon which the entire spiritual edifice is built, is the station of tawbah, or repentance. This is the first conscious and a deliberate act of the seeker. It is the moment when he truly turns back to God. It is not a single one-time event, but a continuous and a lifelong process of turning away from the distractions of the world and the deceptions of the ego, and of turning one's entire being towards the one true reality. True repentance, the masters teach, has three essential components. First, there must be a genuine feeling of remorse, of regret for one's past errors, and for the state of heedlessness in which one has been living. Second, there must be an immediate cessation of the harmful or the sinful action in the present. And third, and most importantly, there must be a firm and an unwavering resolution in the heart to not return to that action in the future. It is a complete and a total reorientation of the will, a profound no to the nafs, and a profound yes to God. Once the foundation of repentance has been laid, the seeker can begin to build the other great stations of the soul upon it. One of the most crucial of these is the station of sabr, or patience. For the Sufis, patience is not a passive or a grim resignation to one's fate. It is an active, a courageous, and a deeply positive spiritual virtue. It is the quality of steadfastness, of endurance, and of a beautiful perseverance in the face of all the difficulties of the path. It is the spiritual equivalent of the warrior's courage. The masters speak of three kinds of patience that the seeker must cultivate. First, there is patience in the performance of one's religious duties, of obeying God's commands, even when they are difficult or when the ego rebels against them. Second, there is patience in abstaining from what God has forbidden, of resisting the powerful temptations of the nafs. And third, and most difficult of all, there is patience in the face of suffering, of affliction, of loss, of accepting the trials of life without complaint, as coming directly from the hand of the beloved. From a utilitarian perspective, this cultivation of patience is a profound psychological technology for minimizing human suffering. Much of our unhappiness comes not from the painful events of our lives, but from our own internal, mental resistance to those events. The practice of patience is a way of training the mind to endure hardship without adding the secondary, and an often a far greater, layer of suffering that comes from our own complaints, our own resistance, and our own self-pity. It is a direct path to a more peaceful and a more resilient state of being. The great spiritual counterpart to patience is the station of shukr, or gratitude. If patience is the art of how to endure hardship, then gratitude is the art of how to receive blessings. It is the constant and a conscious practice of seeing, of acknowledging, and of giving thanks for the endless and an often overlooked gifts of the divine. It is a profound reorientation of the mind, a deliberate shifting of one's focus away from what is lacking in one's life and towards the immense and an almost overwhelming abundance that is already present in every single moment. This is not a simple intellectual acknowledgement, it is a state of the heart, a feeling of joyful appreciation that permeates one's entire being. This state of gratitude, from any psychological or a utilitarian viewpoint, is one of the most direct and a most powerful paths to a happy and a flourishing life. It is the cognitive therapy of the soul, a conscious decision to see the world not as a place of scarcity and of threat, but as a place of infinite generosity and of breathtaking beauty. As the seeker continues his climb, he must cultivate many other stations. He must learn to balance the station of khawf, or fear, a healthy and a reverential awe of God's perfect justice, with the station of raja, or hope, a profound and an unshakable trust in God's infinite mercy. One without the other, the masters teach, leads either to a state of paralyzing despair or to a state of arrogant and a dangerous complacency. The seeker must, like a bird, fly with these two wings in perfect balance. He must also strive for the station of faqr, or spiritual poverty. This is not just the outer poverty of having no possessions, but the inner, psychological poverty of realizing one's own absolute nothingness, and one's complete and a total dependence on God for every single breath and every single heartbeat. It is the emptying of the cup of the ego, so that it can be filled with the divine wine of real existence, and from this arises the station of tawakkul, a state of complete and a total trust and reliance upon God. And so, we see the great and a difficult work of the wayfarer on the path. The stations of the soul are the building blocks of the spiritual character. They are the result of a long, a patient, and a deeply intentional process of self-discipline and of self-transformation. Each station that is successfully attained is a victory over the tyranny of the nafs, It is another rung on the great ladder that leads from the earth to the heavens, another step away from the prison of the self, and another step closer to the infinite freedom of the divine. We have now seen the great and a difficult labor of the Sufi wayfarer, the slow, patient, and a deeply intentional process of climbing the ladder of the maqamat, the stations of the soul. Through his own sustained effort and his own disciplined will, the seeker cultivates the virtues of repentance, of patience, of gratitude, and of trust. He is the humble servant, tirelessly working in the garden of his own heart, pulling the weeds of the nafs and planting the seeds of virtue. But human effort, in the Sufi worldview, is only half of the story. The spiritual life is not just a ladder that we climb, it is also a sky into which we are sometimes, for a brief and a beautiful moment, lifted. The Sufis make a crucial distinction between the stations, which are earned, and the awal, or the states, which are given. A state, or an hal, is a temporary and often an ecstatic, spiritual feeling that descends upon the heart of the seeker, not as a result of his own effort, but as a pure and an unpredictable gift of divine grace. It is a flash of lightning, a sudden fragrance on the wind, a taste of the divine wine that he did not press himself. If the stations are like a farmer, diligently tilling his soil, planting his seeds, and tending to his crops, then the states are like the sudden, the beautiful, and the life-giving rain that falls from the heavens. The farmer cannot make the rain fall, he can only prepare his field so that it is ready to receive it when it comes. In the same way, the seeker cannot produce a spiritual state through his own will. He can only do the hard work of polishing the mirror of his heart so that it is ready to reflect the divine light when it chooses to shine upon him. These states are, by their very nature, fleeting and transitory. Unlike the stable and the enduring stations, a state comes without warning, and it leaves without permission. It is a glimpse of the destination, a foretaste of the union that the soul is striving for, and even a single brief moment in such a state can have a profound and a lasting transformative effect. It can give the seeker the strength, the motivation, and the renewed certainty to continue on the long and often an arduous journey. It is the spiritual nourishment that keeps the traveler on the path. The Sufi masters, in their science of the soul, have carefully mapped and described these various states. One of the most fundamental is the state of qurb, or proximity. This is the feeling of being drawn near to the divine, a sense of profound and a deeply comforting intimacy that begins to dissolve the painful illusion of separation. It is the feeling of the lover who senses that the beloved is near, a state that fills the heart with a quiet and a joyful anticipation, a peace that, from a utilitarian perspective, is a supreme form of human well-being. From this proximity, the even more powerful states of love can arise. The Sufis distinguish between mahabba, a deep and a constant, loving affection for God, and ishq, a more passionate, an ecstatic, and a completely annihilating form of love. Ishq is the state of the lover who has been so completely consumed by the beauty of the beloved that he has forgotten himself entirely. It is a divine madness, a holy intoxication, a fire that burns away everything but the one, single, all-consuming reality of the beloved's presence. The seeker on the path often oscillates between two other, complementary states, the state of heba, or and the state of uns, or intimacy. Is the feeling that arises when the heart is overwhelmed by the majesty, the power, and the absolute transcendence of God. It is a state that can be terrifying, a feeling of one's own absolute nothingness in the face of the infinite. Intimacy, on the other hand, is the feeling that arises from the experience of God's closeness, His beauty, and His infinite mercy. It is a state that is deeply comforting, a feeling of being at home in the presence of one's dearest friend. As the seeker progresses, he may be granted the state of yaqin, or certainty. This is not the intellectual certainty of a logical proof. It is a deep, an unshakable, and a heart-based knowledge of the truth. It is the state where all the clouds of doubt are completely and totally burned away by the direct, luminous sunlight of divine revelation. It is a knowledge that is not just thought, but is tasted, is seen, and is lived, a certainty that can never again be shaken by any argument or any worldly trial. And the most intense of all the states is the state of wajid, a word that means finding or ecstasy. This is the state where the seeker is so completely and so totally overwhelmed by the divine presence that he loses all consciousness of himself and of his surroundings. His individual identity, his ego, simply disappears. It is found and is annihilated in the all-encompassing reality of the One. This is the state that is often manifested physically in the ecstatic cries, the tears, and the spontaneous, trance-like movements of the Sufis in their gatherings of remembrance. It is crucial to understand, however, that the states themselves are not the final goal. The Sufi masters warn that there is a great danger in becoming attached to these beautiful and ecstatic experiences. The seeker, who becomes a kind of spiritual hedonist, who is only interested in chasing the next spiritual thrill, has fallen into a subtle and a dangerous trap of the ego. The states are not the destination, they are merely signposts on the road. They are the nourishment for the journey, not the journey's end. The true goal is not the fleeting state, but the permanent and the stable transformation of one's entire being. The purpose of these divine gifts of grace is to help the seeker in his difficult and his effortful work of climbing the ladder of the stations. The states give him the strength to be more patient, the vision to be more grateful, and the intimacy to be more repentant. They are the divine encouragement that helps him to do his own human work more perfectly. And so, we see the beautiful and the dynamic dance at the very heart of the Sufi path. It is a dance between human effort and divine grace, between the slow, the patient, and the deliberate work of the seeker, and the sudden, the unpredictable, and the beautiful gifts of the beloved. The seeker must do the hard work of preparing the field of his own heart, but it is only the rain of God's grace that can make the seeds of virtue grow. He must do the tireless work of polishing the mirror, but it is only the light of God's beauty that can, in the end, shine within it. The Sufi path, as we have seen, is a journey of profound and often a deeply personal inner transformation. It is a journey through the difficult stations of the soul and the ecstatic, fleeting states of the heart. But how can such an experience, which is by its very nature beyond the realm of ordinary consciousness, even be described? How can the seeker communicate the taste of a reality that is ultimately ineffable, a reality that cannot be captured by the cold, precise logic of the rational mind? The great masters of the Sufi path, especially the magnificent poets of the Persian tradition, understood this problem, and they solved it by creating a new, a beautiful, and a deeply symbolic language, a secret, coded language of the heart. They took the familiar, everyday images of the world, of love, of wine, of beauty, and they transformed them into powerful symbols, into windows that could offer a glimpse into the luminous, mystical reality that lies just behind the veil of the material world. The first, the last, and the most important of all these great symbols is the relationship between the lover and the beloved. In the poetry of the Sufis, God is almost never referred to as a distant king, a stern judge, or an abstract, philosophical principle. Instead, he is the beloved, the ma'shuk, the ultimate and the only true object of a passionate, an all-consuming, and an almost romantic love. He is the source of all beauty, the friend, the companion, the one whose glance can intoxicate the soul. And the human soul, in turn, is the lover, the ashiq, a creature defined by its profound, its constant, and its often a deeply painful yearning for union with its beloved. The entire spiritual life, in this view, is a great and a tragic, but also a beautiful and an ecstatic love story. It is the story of the lover's separation from the beloved, and of his long and his difficult and his passionate journey back home. This single, powerful metaphor transforms the entire religious experience from one of fearful obedience to one of intimate and of joyful desire. To describe the ecstasy of this divine love, the Sufi poets turn to another, even more shocking and a more provocative symbol, the symbol of wine. In Sufi poetry, the wine, or khamr, is not the literal forbidden alcohol of the material world. It is a symbol for the divine ecstasy, the spiritual intoxication, the direct tasting of God's presence that comes when the heart has been purified. It is the wine of a love so powerful that it overwhelms the rational mind and dissolves the sober, separate self. The one who pours this divine wine is the cupbearer, the saki, a figure who is often a symbol for the sheikh, the spiritual master, who guides the disciple and offers him a taste of this higher reality, or is sometimes a symbol for God himself, The ultimate source of all spiritual intoxication and the place where this wine is drunk is the tavern, the karabat, which is a symbol for the Sufi lodge or the place of spiritual retreat. It is a place of ruin, a place where the seeker's old respectable and sober ego is joyfully and willingly annihilated in the bliss of divine love. From a utilitarian perspective, this symbolic language is a work of pure genius. It is a highly effective spiritual technology. By using the familiar, the beautiful, and the emotionally charged language of love and of intoxication, the Sufi poets make the difficult and the often and austere mystical path feel immediate, desirable, and deeply and passionately human. This poetic framework provides a beautiful and an attractive motivation for a life of spiritual practice, a practice that ultimately leads to a state of profound and an unshakable inner peace and happiness. The Sufis developed a rich tapestry of other symbols to describe the soul's journey. One of the most powerful is the image of the moth and the flame. The soul is the moth, a creature that is irresistibly and almost suicidally drawn to the beauty of the candle flame, which is a symbol for the divine beauty of God. The moth knows that to touch the flame is to be completely and totally consumed, to be annihilated, but its love for the light is so absolute that it cannot stay away. It is a perfect and a tragic metaphor for the soul's deep and its mysterious yearning to dissolve itself back into its luminous and its divine source. Another great symbol is that of the rose and the nightingale. The rose, with its breathtaking beauty, its deep fragrance, and its sharp thorns, is a symbol for the beloved, a reality that is at once beautiful, intoxicating, and often a very painful. To behold in the nightingale is a symbol for the soul of the lover, who, having once caught a glimpse of the rose's beauty, is condemned to spend the rest of its life singing an endless, a beautiful, and a deeply sorrowful song of love, of praise, and of a profound and an unquenchable longing. For many Sufis, and especially for the school of Ibn Arabi, the most powerful and the most immediate symbol of the divine in this world is the experience of human beauty. The beautiful face of a man or a woman is seen not just as a physical object of desire, but as a terrestrial mirror, a temporary and a fleeting, but a real and a powerful reflection of the one, absolute, and an eternal divine beauty. To fall in love with a beautiful person is, for the Gnostic, to fall in love with a manifestation of God, a sign that points the heart back towards its ultimate beloved. This, then, is the secret, a coded language of the heart, a symbolic system designed to communicate the great and the luminous truths that lie beyond the grasp of the rational mind. It is a language that is deliberately and a joyfully provocative, a language that takes the forbidden and the worldly symbols of wine, of intoxication, and of romantic love, and it transforms them into the very highest symbols of the spiritual life. A move designed to shock the purely literal-minded believer out of their comfortable and their sober complacency. It is the beautiful, the rich, and the enduring artistic legacy of the Sufi path, a testament to the profound and a timeless truth that the deepest mysteries of the soul can often only be spoken or sung in the sacred language of poetry, of metaphor, and of a deep, a passionate, and an all-consuming love. A love that finds its most perfect and its most eloquent voice in the life and the work of the man who is considered by many to be the greatest mystical poet the world has ever known, Jalaluddin Rumi. We now arrive at the great luminous sun at the very center of the Sufi poetic universe, the man whose name has become synonymous with mystical love and whose words have, for 8 centuries, served as a bridge between the East and the West. The great Persian poet and the sage, Jalaluddin Rumi. But to understand the poet of ecstatic love, we must first understand the man he was before, a man who was, in almost every way, his complete and his total opposite. In the early 13th century, in the city of Konya, in what is now modern-day Turkey, Jalaluddin Rumi was not a wild ecstatic poet. He was one of the most respected and most sober religious scholars of his time. He was a master of Islamic law, of theology, and of philosophy, a man of immense learning, of profound piety, and of a deep and a quiet dignity. He was the heir to a great and a noble scholarly lineage, a pillar of his community, a man who lived his life in the cool, clear, and a well-ordered world of the rational mind. He was a man who had mastered the outer sciences of religion. He could debate the finest points of the law. He could explicate the most difficult passages of the Quran. He was an expert on the map, but he had not yet truly and fully visited the country. He was a man of great knowledge, but he was not yet a man who was on fire. And then, one day in the year 1284, the fire arrived. It arrived in the form of a strange, a powerful, an enigmatic, and an utterly unconventional wandering dervish, a man named Shamsi Tabrizi. Shams, whose very name means the sun, was Rumi's opposite in every way. Where Rumi was a respected scholar, Shams was a homeless wanderer. Where Rumi was sober and methodical, Shams was wild, ecstatic, and unpredictable, and their first legendary meeting was a direct and a dramatic collision between these two worlds, between the world of the book and the world of direct, unmediated experience. A story that has been told and retold for centuries. The story goes that Rumi was teaching his students, surrounded by his precious, handwritten books, when this strange dervish approached him and asked what he was doing. Rumi, with the slight arrogance of a great professor, dismissed him, saying, "This is something you would not understand." At that moment, Shams reached out and threw the entire priceless stack of manuscripts into a nearby fountain. Rumi was horrified, his entire life's work ruined in an instant, but Shams then reached into the water and pulled the books out, and they were, miraculously, completely and totally dry. "What is this?" Rumi stammered, completely bewildered, and Shams replied with a quiet and a devastating smile. "This is something you would not understand." In that single shattering moment, Rumi's entire world was turned upside down. He realized that all of his vast, intellectual, book-based knowledge was a dry and a dusty thing compared to the direct living and a miraculous, spiritual reality that this strange wild man seemed to embody. He had spent his life studying the water, but here was a man who was the ocean itself. This was the beginning of one of the most famous and most transformative spiritual friendships in all of human history. Rumi, the great and a respected professor, immediately abandoned his lectures, his students, his books, and even his own family, to become the humble disciple of this unknown and unkempt wandering dervish. The two of them went into a state of sofa, of deep, continuous, and an unbroken spiritual conversation that lasted for months, locked away from the world, two souls, two suns, merged into one. This, of course, caused a massive and a bitter scandal in the city of Konya. Rumi's own disciples, who had once adored him, became consumed with a furious jealousy. They could not understand what their sober, respected master saw in this strange and an often an abrasive heretic. They saw Shams not as a saint, but as a charlatan, a magician, a dark influence who had bewitched their beloved teacher and had led him astray from the path of respectable piety. The city buzzed with gossip, with resentment, and with a growing and a dangerous hatred for the outsider. Shams was not a teacher in the ordinary sense. He did not give Rumi a new set of doctrines or a new philosophy. He was, instead, a perfect and a ruthless divine mirror. He reflected back to Rumi not just his immense spiritual potential, but also all of his hidden, intellectual pride, his vanity, and his attachment to his own scholarly reputation. Shams was the fire that burned away everything in Rumi that was not pure, that was not essential, that was not love. He was the great catalyst who did not teach Rumi about God, but who introduced him, directly and unforgettably, to his own soul. Eventually, the jealousy and the hatred of Rumi's disciples became too much to bear, and Shams, likely to protect his friend from the growing conflict, simply disappeared from Konya one night. Rumi was thrown into a state of profound and almost a suicidal grief. The sun of his life had vanished, and he was left in a state of absolute darkness, of desolation, and of a deep and a consuming spiritual yearning. But it was in the very heart of this terrible and this painful fire of separation that the great poet, Rumi, was finally and truly born. To cope with his unbearable grief, he began to pour out his soul in poetry. Thousands upon thousands of verses of the most beautiful, the most passionate, and the most ecstatic poetry of divine love that the world has ever known. He addressed these poems to his absent friend, who had now become for him a perfect symbol for the absent God, for the divine beloved, for whom his soul now yearned with an infinite and an unquenchable thirst. And it was also in this period that he began to turn, to whirl, to engage in the great ecstatic dance of the Sam as a way of transforming his grief into a state of blissful, dizzying union. After a long search, Rumi's own son managed to find Shams and to persuade him to return to Konya. But the reunion was to be a tragically short one. The jealousy of the disciples had not subsided, it had only deepened, and one night, Shams disappeared for a final and a permanent time. It is almost certain, ended by the very same men who claimed to love Rumi the most. Rumi's sun had set forever, and this final devastating loss is what completed his spiritual transformation. He realized, in a final, great flash of insight, that the beloved he had been seeking in the external form of Shams was in fact not outside of him at all. "Why should I seek?" he would later write. "I am the same as he. His essence speaks through me. I have been looking for myself." He had finally understood that the divine sun was not in Tabriz. It was at the very center of his own awakened heart. The painful, chaotic, and a deeply disruptive intervention of Shams had been the necessary and the terrible price for this ultimate self-knowledge. A price that, while causing immense short-term suffering, produced a long-term and an almost an infinite benefit for the entire world. The soul-healing beauty of his poetry. He had to be broken open so that the divine light within him could finally pour out and illuminate the world. The violent and a deeply painful disappearance of his spiritual son, Shamsi Tabrizi, was the event that shattered Jalaluddin Rumi the scholar, and from the broken pieces of his heart, a new and a far more powerful being was born, Rumi the poet, the voice of divine love for the next 30 years of his life. He was no longer a man who taught from books. He was a man who was a direct and an open channel for a seemingly endless torrent of mystical poetry. Tens of thousands of verses that are not a philosophy but are a direct, spontaneous, and a fiery record of a soul that has been completely and totally consumed by ecstasy, or divine love. The central and the all-encompassing metaphor of Rumi's entire universe is the relationship between the lover, the ashiq, and the beloved, the ma'shuq. This single powerful image completely reframes the entire spiritual quest. God is no longer the distant and the fearsome king or the stern and the demanding judge. He is the beloved, a being of such breathtaking, of such heart-shattering, and of such an almost unbearably intense beauty that the soul, upon catching even a single fleeting glimpse of him, is forever changed. The human soul, in turn, is the lover, a creature that is defined by a single and an all-consuming emotion, a profound, a constant, and a deeply and often a sweetly painful yearning for union with its beloved. The entire spiritual life is no longer a matter of obedience, of duty, or of earning a reward. It is a love story, a passionate, a desperate, and an often a tragic, but always a beautiful, quest for the lover to return to the arms of the one he has lost. It is the story of a separation and a longing for reunion. This pain of separation is not, for Rumi, a negative state to be avoided. It is the very engine of the spiritual life. It is a sacred wound, a gift from the beloved that keeps the lover's heart alive and forever turned towards him. The wound, Rumi famously wrote, is the place where the light enters you. He celebrates this pain, this longing, this lover's sickness, because he knows that it is the very force that will burn away the lover's impurities and will, in the end, guide him home. It is a suffering that is, from a utilitarian perspective, profoundly productive, a necessary pain that leads to the ultimate and the highest possible form of happiness. The ultimate goal of the lover is not to possess or even to understand the beloved. It is to be completely and totally annihilated in him. To have the small illusory self of the ego be completely burned away in the infinite, all-consuming fire of the beloved's presence. Rumi tells a famous story to illustrate this. A lover knocks at the door of his beloved, and a voice from within asks, "Who is there?" The lover replies, "It is I." And the voice says, "This house will not hold both me and thee." And the door remains closed. The lover goes away into the desert, to fast and to pray, to purify himself of the eye, that is the great veil between him and his beloved. After a long time he returns and knocks again at the door. The voice from within once more asks, "Who is there?" And this time, the lover, now emptied of himself, replies, "It is thou," and the door, finally, swings open. This is the great secret of the path of love. The lover must die before he dies. He must allow his own small, separate self to be completely and totally erased, so that only the reality of the beloved remains. This is why the symbol of the tavern of ruin, the karubat, is so central to Rumi's poetry. The tavern is the place where the lover goes to become drunk on the wine of divine ecstasy. It is a place that exists beyond belief and unbelief, a place where the ordinary rules of respectable, sober society no longer apply. It is called the place of ruin because it is here that the lover's most precious worldly possessions, his reputation, his piety, his rationality, and his very own self, are all joyfully and willingly sacrificed. They are the price he pays for a single taste of the beloved's wine. Rumi's poetry is a vast and a beautiful tapestry of these symbols. He speaks of the soul as a moth, irresistibly drawn to the flame of the divine beauty, a flame that it knows will consume it, but a flame that it cannot, and does not want to, resist. He speaks of the soul as a nightingale, having once seen the perfect beauty of the divine rose, is now condemned to spend its entire life singing a song of love, of praise, and of an unquenchable and a beautiful sorrow. He teaches that the entire world, if looked at with the eyes of the lover, is a message from the beloved. Every beautiful face, every sunset, every blossoming flower is a secret love letter, a glimpse of the one, absolute beauty, that is the source of all the fleeting, relative beauties of this world. The lover's task is to learn how to read this secret language, to see the face of the beloved reflected in every single atom of his magnificent and his beautiful creation. This passionate and an almost an erotic love for God was, and still is, a deeply challenging and sometimes a controversial idea. It is a path that seems to place the raw, emotional experience of the heart above the careful, logical distinctions of the theological mind. It is a path that is full of paradoxes, where sorrow is a gift, where ruin is a blessing, and where the annihilation of the self is the ultimate and the most joyful of all possible victories. But it is also a path of profound and of almost an unimaginable joy. It is a way of transforming the entire universe, from a cold and an indifferent place into a vibrant, a living, and a deeply personal love affair between the soul and its eternal source. It is a path that promises a happiness so intense, so profound, and so all-consuming that it makes all the fleeting pleasures of the material world seem like pale and insignificant shadows. Rumi's great and an enduring gift to the world is this very language of the heart. He gave a voice to the soul's deepest and its most secret yearning. He created a poetry that could bridge the gap between the human and the divine, and in doing so, he created a body of work that has, for 8 centuries, served as a source of inspiration, of solace, and of profound spiritual nourishment for millions of seekers, of all faiths and of none, all across the world. His is a universal message, a call to all of humanity to embark on the one great journey that truly matters. We have now seen how the great and a terrible loss of his spiritual master Shamsi Tabrizi transformed Jalaluddin Rumi from a sober scholar into the world's greatest poet of divine love. His grief, his longing, and his ecstatic joy poured out of him in a torrent of verse. But at the very beginning of his great 6-volume masterpiece, the Masnavi, he condenses his entire, vast, and a complex vision of the soul's journey into a single perfect and an unforgettable allegory. It is the opening 18 lines of the book, the prelude to his entire life's work, the beautiful and the deeply sorrowful song of the reed flute. The poem begins not with Rumi's own voice, but with the voice of the instrument itself, the simple, hollow reed flute. The ney that is so central to the music of the Sufis. Listen to this reed flute, it begins. How it is complaining. It is telling a story of separations. This is the first and the most important lesson of the poem, that the fundamental experience of the human soul in this world is one of separation, of exile, and of a deep and a constant and a sorrowful longing for the home that it has lost. The flute then proceeds to tell its own life story, a story that is a perfect and a beautiful metaphor for the journey of every human soul. Ever since I was cut from the reed bed, it cries, my lament has caused man and woman to moan. The reed bed is a symbol for the world of the spirit, our original, primordial home, the place where all souls existed in a state of perfect, undifferentiated unity with their divine source. With God, it is a state of blissful, unconscious oneness. The paradise from which we have all been exiled. The human soul, then, is the reed flute. At the moment of our birth into this material world, we are, like the reed, violently cut down from our spiritual home. We are separated from our source, and we are thrown into this world of multiplicity, of difference, and of a profound and a deeply painful sense of separation. And it is from this original and this tragic act of separation that the entire sorrowful song of human life begins. Our first cry as a newborn is the first note in this long and this mournful song of longing. But the ordeal of the reed is not over. After it has been cut down, its insides must be hollowed out. It must be completely and totally emptied of its own inner substance. This is a powerful and a deeply challenging metaphor for the process of spiritual purification. The hollowing out of the reed is the annihilation of the nafs, the lower self, the ego. The seeker on the spiritual path must be emptied of all of his own selfish desires, of his own pride, of his own intellectual arrogance, and of his own separate individual will. From a utilitarian perspective, this is a profound spiritual therapy. The poem takes the most universal and the most painful of all human feelings, the feeling of loneliness, of separation, of a longing for a lost home, and it gives it a sacred and a beautiful meaning. It teaches us that this very pain, this disutility, is not a curse or a mistake, but is the very thing that makes us human, the very thing that makes us capable of producing a beautiful and a meaningful song. It transforms our suffering from a meaningless affliction into a purposeful and a holy yearning. Only when the reed has been completely and totally hollowed out, only when the seeker has been completely and totally emptied of his own self, can the final and the most creative act of transformation occur. The flute player must then take the hollow reed and drill holes into it. These holes are the wounds of life, the pains, the sorrows, the losses that every soul must endure. But in the hands of the divine artist, even these wounds become a source of beauty, for it is through these very holes that the music will be made. And this leads us to the final and the most beautiful secret of the poem. The reed flute, even after all this, does not make music on its own. It is still just a simple, a hollow, and a silent piece of wood. The breathtaking and the soul-stirring music that it produces comes not from the reed itself, but from the breath of the flute player who is blowing through it. The flute is merely the instrument, the vessel, the channel through which the musician's own song is made audible. The flute player, of course, is God, the divine beloved, and the flute is the purified human soul, the song of the soul. Its deepest longing, its most profound love, its most ecstatic joy, is not its own song. It is the breath of God, the divine spirit passing through the hollowed out and the fully surrendered vessel of the perfected human being. Our own deepest love for God is, in the end, nothing less than God's own infinite love for himself, a love that he has graciously chosen to express through us. Rumi tells us that this fire of love, this song of the reed, is a secret that is not for everyone. Its message can only be understood by those whose own hearts have been wounded by this same divine separation. The secret of my song is not far from my lament, the flute cried, but eye and ear lack the light to perceive it. Only the wounded, he says elsewhere, hear the cry of the wounded. It is a secret that can only be understood by a fellow lover, a fellow exile, a fellow soul who is also on fire with this same beautiful and a deeply painful longing for home. This poem, then, is the entire Sufi path in miniature. It is the story of our soul's primordial and our tragic separation from its divine origin. It is the story of the difficult and the necessary work of emptying the self, of hollowing out the ego, and it is the story of the final and the blissful state of becoming a perfect and a surrendered instrument in the hands of the divine musician, a channel through which the eternal and the beautiful and the sorrowful and the ecstatic music of love can be played. Rumi, through the simple and the humble voice of a reed flute, has given us the great and the timeless song of the human soul, a song that has been complaining of separation ever since it was first cut from its home, a song that will not and cannot rest until it is finally and completely reunited with the great, the silent, and the all-encompassing reed bed of the divine, a union that is not just a poetic metaphor, but a real and a physical possibility in the most famous of all Sufi rituals, the whirling dance of the Sama. The poetry of Jalaluddin Rumi is not a philosophy to be read. It is a song to be heard, a dance to be danced. It is a direct and a passionate invitation to move beyond the world of words and into the world of direct ecstatic experience. And the ultimate physical expression of his entire life-altering vision is to be found in the most famous and most beautiful of all Sufi rituals, the sacred ceremony of the Sama, the hypnotic and a deeply symbolic dance of the whirling dervishes. It is said that Rumi himself first began to whirl spontaneously in the streets of Konya, his body turning in a dance of unbearable grief and of ecstatic longing after the final disappearance of his spiritual son, Shamsi Tabrizi. From this personal and this deeply painful origin, the Sama evolved into a highly sophisticated and a deeply symbolic ritual, a form of active meditation, a prayer that is performed not with the tongue but with the entire surrendered body. It is a spiritual technology designed to facilitate the soul's ultimate journey, the journey into the arms of the beloved. To the outside observer, the Sama may appear to be a beautiful and exotic performance, but for the dervish, the Semizan, it is a profound and a sacred act, a complete microcosm of the entire spiritual universe, and this is reflected in every single detail of the ceremony, beginning with the very clothes that he wears, his tall camel hair hat. The sikhi represents the tombstone of his own ego. The nafs, it is a silent declaration that he has come here to die. His long white flowing skirt, the tenure, represents the shroud of that same ego. It is the burial garment for his lower self, and his black cloak, the Tariqa, which he wears at the beginning of the ceremony, represents the dark, the material, and the ignorant world of the grave, the tomb of the body itself. The entire costume is a funeral procession, a deliberate and a conscious preparation for the dervish to die before he dies, to leave behind his small mortal self and to be reborn into a higher and an eternal reality. The ceremony begins with a slow, a solemn, and a deeply meditative procession. The dervishes circle the hall 3 times, their steps measured, their heads bowed, each bow to one another, an acknowledgement of the divine breath that is hidden within every human soul. And then, under the guidance of the Shaikh, the master of the ceremony, the dervishes let their black cloaks fall to the ground. This is a moment of profound and of silent drama. It symbolizes their spiritual rebirth, their shedding of the dark, earthly tomb, and their emergence, clad in the white shroud of the purified self, into the luminous presence of the divine. And then, the turning begins. Slowly at first, the dervishes unfold their arms, and with a gradual and an almost an impossible grace, they begin to turn, to revolve, to whirl, their white skirts blossoming like great white flowers, their bodies becoming living, breathing planets in a silent cosmic dance, and the very posture of their bodies is a profound and a beautiful prayer. The right hand is raised, its palm turned up towards the heavens, to receive the divine grace, the love and the blessing, the barakah of God. The left hand is lowered, its palm turned down towards the earth, and through it, the dervish channels that divine grace that he has received down into the world, to all of creation. In this posture, the dervish is no longer just a man, he has become a conduit, a living channel, a bridge between heaven and earth. He is not a passive recipient of God's grace, he is an active participant in its transmission, a generous vessel who gives to the world the very love that he himself is receiving. It is the ultimate expression of active love. The turning itself is a profound act of cosmic alignment. The dervish revolves on his own axis, around the center of his own heart, just as the planets revolve around the sun, and as the electrons revolve around the nucleus of an atom. It is an act of surrendering one's own small individual motion and of joining in the great silent and a universal spinning of all of creation. It is a way of harmonizing the microcosm of the self with the macrocosm of the entire universe. It is a dance of pure and of total unity. From a utilitarian perspective, the Sama is a masterful and a highly effective psychophysical technology. It is a disciplined, a repeatable, and a safe method for systematically deconstructing the ordinary egoic consciousness, which is the source of so much of our anxiety and our suffering, and for inducing a non-ordinary ecstatic state of consciousness, a state of profound joy, of unity, and of a deep and a lasting sense of well-being. It is a practical path to one of the highest and a most desirable forms of human flourishing. As the dervish turns, he enters a state of profound and of wakeful trance. He is not lost in the dance. He is, in fact, more present than ever before. His entire being, his mind, his heart, and his body is focused on a single silent point, the still point at the center of the turning world, and that still point is the presence of God in his own heart. The rational, the chattering mind of the nafs becomes silent. The boundaries of the individual self begin to dissolve, and the dervish experiences a state of wajid, of ecstasy, of finding the one reality that he has been seeking. He is the moth, joyfully and willingly circling the divine flame. He is the lover, turning in an ecstatic dance around the beauty of his beloved. He is the reed flute, his entire, hollowed-out being now filled with the divine breath, which is the very source of his motion. It is the ultimate physical expression of the entire Sufi path. To die to the small, separate self, to be reborn in the infinite, all-encompassing reality of the divine, and to become a generous and a loving channel of grace for all of creation. The dance is not a chaotic frenzy. It is a search for that profound and an unshakable stillness that lies at the very heart of all motion, a stillness that is the true nature of the soul that has found its home and its rest. In God it is the song of the reed flute, made visible, a beautiful, a sorrowful, and an ecstatic prayer, a physical testament to the soul's final and its joyful union with the One, the state that the Sufis call fana. We have now walked the Tariqa, the great Sufi path. We have confronted the inner tyrant of the nafs. We have polished the mirror of the qalb with the constant remembrance of God. We have climbed the difficult ladder of the stations and have been graced with the beautiful, fleeting visions of the states, and we have witnessed the ecstatic dance of the whirling dervish, which is the physical embodiment of the soul's journey. And now we arrive at the very summit of that journey, the ultimate and the most mysterious goal of the seeker, the state of fana. The word fana in Arabic means to pass away, to cease to exist, or annihilation. It is a terrifying and a deeply challenging concept, for it seems to suggest that the ultimate goal of the spiritual life is a kind of self-destruction, a dissolution into a great and an empty nothingness. But for the Sufis, fana is not an end, it is a transformation. It is not a death into nothingness, but a death of the false and a rebirth into the true. It is the most profound and the most liberating of all possible human experiences. What is it then that is annihilated? It is not the body, it is not the essential consciousness of the seeker. What passes away, what is utterly and completely destroyed in the fire of divine love, is the nafs, the lower self, the ego. It is the final and the total death of that small, grasping, and terrified I that has been the source of all our suffering, all our fear, and all our separation from God. Fana is the moment when the great illusion of a separate, independent self is completely and totally shattered. The Sufi poets have used a number of beautiful and powerful metaphors to describe this indescribable state. The soul, they say, is like a single solitary drop of water, and the divine reality is the infinite and the shoreless ocean. The entire spiritual life is the journey of that drop back to its source, and fana is the sacred and a blissful moment when the drop finally falls back into the ocean. In that moment, the dropness of the drop, its sense of being a separate, isolated entity, completely disappears. But the water of the drop does not cease to exist. It simply realizes its own, true and an eternal nature, which was, and always has been, the ocean itself. Another great metaphor is that of the moth and the flame. The soul is the moth, the ashiq, who is so completely and so helplessly in love with the beauty of the divine flame that it flies directly into it. In that final ecstatic embrace, the form of the moth is completely consumed. It is annihilated in the fire of its own love. But it has not been destroyed. It has in fact become one with the very light that it had always been seeking. It has lost its small, fleeting, and shadowy existence, and has gained the infinite and the luminous reality of the flame. From a utilitarian perspective, the state of fana is the ultimate and the most perfect form of human well-being. The ego, the nafs, is the very engine of disutility. It is the source of all the negative and the painful mental states that cause us to suffer fear, anxiety, greed, envy, and the profound pain of loneliness and of separation. The annihilation of this ego, therefore, is the complete and a total cessation of all psychological suffering. It is a state of supreme, of perfect, and of an unshakable happiness, the highest possible utility that a human soul can achieve. The path to this state, the masters teach, often moves through several stages. The first is Purified Shaikh, the annihilation of the disciple's will in the will of his spiritual master. This is the necessary first step, where the raw, rebellious ego of the seeker learns the difficult art of surrender. The second stage is Purified Shell, the annihilation of the disciple's character in the character of the Prophet Muhammad, where the seeker strives to embody the perfect virtues, the compassion, the patience, the humility of the prophetic model. And the third and the final stage is Purified, the annihilation of the self in God. This is the ultimate goal, the moment when the seeker, having been purified of his own will and of his own character, finally and completely disappears into the overwhelming and the all-encompassing presence of the divine reality. It is the moment of perfect union, the fulfillment of the lover's deepest and his most sacred yearning, the wedding of the soul with its eternal beloved. This raises the great and a paradoxical question: does the self truly cease to exist? And the Sufi answer is a subtle, a beautiful, and a deeply paradoxical one. Yes and no. The false self, the illusory, separate, and a deeply constricted ego that we mistake for our true identity. This self absolutely and completely ceases to exist. It is burned away. It is dissolved. It is revealed to have been nothing more than a dream, a shadow, a ghost from the very beginning. But the true self, the divine spark, the secret of God that is hidden at the very center of our being, this self does not cease to exist. On the contrary, it is in the moment of fana that it awakens, for the very first time, to its own true, infinite, and an eternal nature. It is a death that is, in fact, the ultimate and the most profound form of birth. It is the supreme paradox of the spiritual life. You must lose yourself completely and totally in order to finally and truly find yourself. Fana, then, is the great and a silent climax of the seeker's journey towards God. It is the end of the path, the end of all striving, the end of all longing, because the lover has finally and completely become one with the beloved. It is the end of the illusion of separation and the beginning of a life lived in the constant, the blissful, and the luminous awareness of the one, single, divine reality that is the source, the substance, and the final destination of all things. But is this the final end of the story? Is the goal of the path to simply disappear into a state of blissful cosmic union and to remain there forever? For many of the great Sufi masters, the answer is no. The annihilation of the self in God is not the final chapter. It is merely the prelude to an even more profound and a more mysterious state of being. For the great question remains, what happens after the drop has returned to the ocean? What happens after the moth has become one with the flame? This is the great mystery of the journey back into the world, the state that the Sufis call Baka. We have now reached the very summit of the Sufi path, the dizzying and a deeply blissful peak of Fana, the annihilation of the self in God. The drop of the individual soul has returned to the infinite ocean of the divine. The moth of the lover has been completely and totally consumed by the flame of the beloved. The long, painful, and often an arduous journey of separation seems to have finally come to its end, in a state of perfect and a silent and a timeless union. But here, at this very peak, the greatest masters of the path ask a profound and a surprising question: is this truly the end? Is the ultimate goal of the spiritual life to simply disappear into a state of blissful, inactive, and a purely personal ecstasy? Is the perfected soul a star that has collapsed into its own light, a being that has become so absorbed in the divine that it is of no more use to the world? For many of the great Sufi saints, the answer is a resounding no. They teach that Fana, the journey towards God, is not the final station. It is merely the prelude to an even more profound, a more mature and a more mysterious stage of the journey in God, back into the world of creation. This is the state they call Baka. The word Baka in Arabic means to subsist, to endure, or to remain. It is the state that follows annihilation. It is a spiritual resurrection, a return to the world of form and of multiplicity. But it is a return with a completely and a totally transformed consciousness, the seeker having had his own false individual ego, the nafs, completely and totally dissolved in the state of fana. is now given a new and a divine personality by God. He has died to himself, and he is now reborn to live a new life, a life that is in and through God. He returns to the world of the senses. He sees the same trees, the same mountains, the same people, but he no longer sees them through the narrow, distorting, and a deeply selfish lens of the ego. He now sees the world, in a very real sense, through the eyes of the drop has not just disappeared into the ocean. The entire infinite ocean now looks out through the two small eyes of that one single and now completely transparent drop. The lover has not just been annihilated in the beloved now lives and breathes and loves the world through the heart of the lover. This is the perfection of the state that Ibn Arabi called seeing with two eyes. The mystic in the state of Baka sees both the unity and the diversity of creation at the very same time. With the eye of the heart, he sees the one single, divine reality, the ocean that is the soul and the only truth of all things. But with the eye of the head, he also sees the unique, the beautiful, and the necessary form of every single, individual wave. He lives in the perfect and a paradoxical balance of these two visions, seeing the one in the many, and the many in the one. His actions in the world are now of a completely different nature. The mystic in the state of Baka still eats, still sleeps, still works, still interacts with other people, but he no longer feels that I am the one who is performing these actions. He experiences his own will as being in perfect and effortless harmony with the divine will. He has become a perfect instrument in the hands of the divine artist, a flawless pen in the hand of the divine writer. His every action, his every word, his every breath is now a direct and an unobstructed expression of the divine reality itself. From a utilitarian perspective, this is the great and a final justification of the entire Sufi path. If the journey ended in fana, in a state of purely private and an inactive bliss, it could be criticized as a form of selfish escapism. But the return in the state of Baka is an act of supreme and a profound generosity. It is the moment when the immense personal well-being achieved by the mystic is transformed into a source of immense social utility, a benefit for all of humanity. The perfected individual now becomes a powerful and a benevolent force for good in the world. The saint who lives in the state of Baka has become a perfect mirror for the divine attributes. His compassion is a direct reflection of God's infinite mercy. His wisdom is a reflection of God's infinite knowledge. His beauty is a reflection of God's infinite beauty, and his love is a reflection of God's infinite love. He has become a source of immense blessing, and a profound and a healing presence in his community, a guide, a teacher, and a living testament to the transformative power of the spiritual path. The great model for this entire journey, for the Sufis, is the life of the Prophet Muhammad himself. His great mystical night journey, the Miraj, is seen as the ultimate example of fana, an ascension through all the heavens to the very throne of God, a moment of the most intimate and the most annihilating divine union. But the Prophet did not stay in that state of blissful union. He returned, he came back down to earth, back to his community, to bring the guidance, the wisdom, and the compassion that he had received. This return is the great model for the state of Baka. The ultimate goal of the spiritual life, therefore, is not to escape the world, but to return to it and to transform it. It is to bring the light of the heavens down into the darkness of the earth. It is to see the face of God in the face of every single human being. It is to live in the world, but to be no longer of the world. It is to be a living, a breathing, and a walking embodiment of the divine presence, a source of mercy, of love, and of peace for all of creation. This, then, is the state of the perfected saint, the one who has completed the entire great circle of the journey. He has journeyed from the world to God in the state of fana, and he has returned from God to the world in the state of Baka. He is the one who has died to his lower self, and has been reborn into his true and his divine self. He has become the place where the infinite ocean of the divine and the single finite drop of the individual personality perfectly and beautifully coexist. He has become the human being that we are all, in our deepest essence, meant to be, a creature who is at once a humble and a devoted servant of God, and at the same time, a perfect and a luminous reflection of God. A true vicegerent, a Khalifa, on earth. He is the one who has finally and truly realized the ultimate Sufi ideal, the ideal of Al-Insan al-Kamil, the perfect man. We have now traveled with the Sufi seeker on his long and his arduous and his beautiful journey home. We have witnessed his great inner battle with the tyrannical nafs. We have seen him polish the mirror of his qalb, or heart, until it shines with a divine light, and we have followed him to the very summit of the mystical path, to the annihilating ecstasy of fana, and to the serene and the world-embracing return of Baka. And now we must ask the final question: what is the ultimate fruit of this entire transformative process? What is the nature of the human being who has completed this journey? The answer, in the rich and a deeply hopeful vision of the Sufi masters, is the ideal of al-Insan al-Kamil, a phrase that translates as the perfect man or the complete human being. This is not just a moral ideal, it is a cosmological one, for in the worldview of a great master like Ibn Arabi, the perfect man is the very reason for the existence of the entire universe. He is the goal, the purpose, and the ultimate justification of all of creation. He is the one in whom God's great creative project finds its final and its most perfect fulfillment. To understand this, we must recall the famous and a beautiful sacred tradition, or hadith Qudsi, in which God says, "I was a hidden treasure, and I longed to be known, so I created the creation that I might be known." The entire universe, then, is a great and a beautiful act of divine self-disclosure, a vast mirror in which the hidden treasure of the divine reality can be revealed. And the perfect man is the very center of that mirror, the one point in which the reflection is the most clear, the most complete, and the most conscious of itself. The Sufis explain this with the profound and a beautiful concept of the microcosm and the macrocosm, the entire universe, with all its galaxies, its stars, its planets, its kingdoms of minerals, of plants, and of animals, is the macrocosm, the big man. It is a vast and a sprawling and a magnificent display of all of God's various names and attributes. But it is a display that is, for the most part, unconscious of its own grandeur. A tree perfectly embodies God's attribute of the life-giver, and a mountain perfectly embodies his attribute of the mighty, but they do not know it. The human being, on the other hand, is the microcosm, the small man. We are created in a unique and a special form that contains within itself the potential to reflect not just one or a few, but all of the divine names and attributes in a conscious and a knowing way. The perfect man is the one who has fully and completely actualized this potential. He is a small, polished mirror in which the entire vast, magnificent universe is perfectly and consciously reflected. He is the summary of the entire book of creation. He is, therefore, the great isthmus, the barzakh, the bridge that both separates and connects the two great realities of God and of the world. He stands between the eternal, uncreated reality of the divine and the temporal, created reality of the cosmos, and he is a perfect citizen of both realms. He is the channel through which the divine grace, the mercy and the love of God can flow down into the world of creation. And he is the channel through which the praise, the love and the adoration of all of creation can flow back up to its divine source. From a utilitarian perspective, the perfect man is the ultimate ideal. He is the individual who, having achieved a state of supreme and an unshakable personal well-being, now acts as a source of maximum positive utility for the entire world, because his own small, individual will has been completely and perfectly harmonized with the universal and the divine will. His every action, his every word, his every breath, is by its very nature perfectly aligned with the good, the beautiful, and the true. He is the ultimate force for harmony and for the reduction of suffering. He is the perfect teacher, the perfect guide, the perfect friend, and the perfect healer. His very presence in the world is a source of blessing, of peace, and of immense spiritual nourishment for the entire community. He is the ultimate expression of a flourishing life, a life that has achieved its own highest happiness, precisely by becoming a source of happiness for all others. His is a state of being in which the good of the self and the good of the whole have become completely and totally indistinguishable. The ultimate and the most complete embodiment of this ideal for all Muslims is, of course, the person of the Prophet Muhammad. For the Sufis, he is not just the historical messenger of the Quran, he is the eternal reality of the perfect man, the first and the most complete manifestation of the divine consciousness in the world, and all the great Sufi saints and the masters who have come after him, in all their various forms and their unique flavors, are seen as the heirs of the Prophet, each one a partial and a beautiful reflection of his perfect and his all-encompassing spiritual reality. It is here that we can see the profound and the unbridgeable gap between the Sufi ideal of the perfect man and the Nietzschean ideal of the overman. The overman is a creator of his own values, a figure of heroic and of solitary pride who stands above the rest of humanity in a state of magnificent isolation. The perfect man, on the other hand, is a perfect reflector of God's eternal values, a figure of profound and of almost an impossible humility who exists only to serve the rest of humanity and all of creation. The overman's great cry is, "I will," a declaration of the supremacy of his own individual will. The perfect man's great cry is the cry of the prophet at the height of his union with God. "I have no I," a declaration of the complete and a total surrender of his own will to the will of the divine. The overman is the ultimate rebellion against God. The perfect man is the ultimate submission to God. They are two of the most powerful and the most profoundly opposed visions of human perfection ever conceived. The entire arduous Sufi path, the taming of the nafs, the polishing of the qalb, the journey through fana and baqa, is all for the sake of producing this one beautiful and a sacred being, the being who can finally fulfill the deep and the eternal longing of the hidden treasure to be known and to be loved. He is the eye through which God sees his own world. He is the tongue through which God speaks his own praise. He is the point where the journey of creation finally and beautifully comes home to itself. We have now traveled the long, the beautiful, and the often a difficult Sufi path. The Tariqa. We began our journey with the first great battle against the inner tyrant, the nafs. And we learned of the seeker's slow and his patient ascent through the stages of the soul, from the self that blames to the self that is finally at peace. We have seen how the primary work of the seeker is to polish the mirror of the qalb, the spiritual heart, using the sacred and the powerful tool of Dhikr, the remembrance of God, so that the heart may be purified of the rust of the ego. We have sat at the feet of the great masters of this tradition. We have witnessed the brilliant and the healing synthesis of Al-Ghazali, who reconciled the outer law with the inner truth. We have been intoxicated by the pure and the selfless love of the great female saint, Rabia, al-Adawiyya, and we have been taken to the very limits of metaphysical thought by the staggering and the cosmic vision of the greatest master, Ibn Arabi, who taught us to see the oneness of being in all of creation. We have listened to the passionate and the sorrowful and the ecstatic love songs of Rumi, the greatest of all the mystical poets, and we have witnessed the physical embodiment of his vision in the sacred and the whirling dance of the Sama, and finally, we have journeyed to the very summit of the path, to the mysterious and the annihilating state of fana, the death of the false self, and to the serene and the world-embracing resurrection of baqa, the life of subsistence in God, a journey that culminates in the beautiful and the awe-inspiring ideal of al-Insan al-Kamil, the perfect man. And now, at the end of this great and a winding journey, we can stand back and see the path in its entirety, and we can recognize that this entire vast and a complex tradition is, at its core, a single, simple, and a profoundly beautiful story. It is the story of a journey from the illusion of separation to the reality of union. It is a path designed to heal the one great and fundamental wound of the human soul, the wound of feeling that we are separate from our own divine source, separate from each other, and separate from the world around us. The entire intricate machinery of the Sufi path, the relationship with the Shaikh, the discipline of the stations, the grace of the states, the chanting, the whirling, the poetry, all of it is designed to do one and only one thing: to dissolve the great illusion that is the source of all our suffering, the illusion of the separate self, the ego, the nafs. It is a journey from the arrogant and the lonely and the terrified prison of the I to the blissful, the all-encompassing, and the infinitely loving reality of the divine He. We have seen that this journey is often described as having two great wings, upon which the soul flies back to its home. The first is the wing of Marifa, or Gnosis, the path of divine knowledge. This is the path of a master like Ibn Arabi, a path of seeing, of insight, of a profound and an intuitive understanding of the metaphysical truth of the oneness of being. It is the path that overcomes the illusion of separation through a radical and a luminous shift in perception. And the second wing is that of Mahabba, or Iks, the path of divine love. This is the path of a master like Rabia or Rumi, a path of feeling, of yearning, of a passionate and an all-consuming devotion to the beloved. It is the path that seeks to overcome the illusion of separation, not by understanding it, but by burning it away in the ecstatic and the annihilating fire of a pure and an unconditional love. The complete Sufi, the perfect man, is the one who flies with both these wings in perfect balance. From a utilitarian perspective, the Sufi path is perhaps the most complete and the most sophisticated technology for human well-being ever conceived. It begins with a perfect diagnosis of the root cause of all our suffering, our disutility, which is the tyranny of the ego. And it provides a comprehensive and a time-tested set of practical, psychological, and spiritual tools for overcoming this suffering. Its ultimate goal is the achievement of a supreme and an unshakable state of happiness, of peace, and of compassionate connection, the highest possible utility that a human being can experience. And now we can end our journey with the single, most beautiful, and most central of all the Sufi metaphors, the metaphor that contains within it the entire secret of the path, the metaphor of the ocean in a drop, the human heart. The Kalbi is the single small drop of water in its ordinary unpurified state. This drop is cloudy, it is turbulent, it is filled with the dirt and the debris of the world, and it believes in its profound ignorance that it is a separate and a lonely thing, cut off from the great ocean that is its true home. The entire Sufi path is the slow, the patient, and the loving process of purifying that one single drop. The practices of Dhikr, of service, of love, are all designed to allow the dirt of the ego to settle, to allow the turbulence of the passions to become still until the drop becomes completely and perfectly clear and transparent. And in that final and that luminous moment of absolute clarity, the drop looks within itself and it makes the most astonishing discovery imaginable. It discovers that its own small and a seemingly insignificant reality contains within it a perfect and a complete reflection of the entire, infinite, and a majestic ocean of the divine. The great and a final secret of the path is that you do not need to travel to some distant shore to find the ocean. The entire ocean is, and has always been, contained within the single, luminous, and a beautifully polished drop of your own heart. Sufism, in the end, is a timeless and a universal invitation. It is a call to embark on the greatest, the most important, and the most beautiful of all possible human adventures. The journey from the small, constricted, and the illusory prison of the self to the vast, the luminous, and the infinitely loving freedom of the one true self. It is the sacred science of discovering the ocean in a drop, and of finding in the very center of your own being the hidden treasure that is the source, the substance, and the final blissful destination of all things.